So today we're learning about unintended consequences, and we're going to start right here. Where's that, Mike Franz? Oh, good question, Mike Franz. I've got a real question, yes. Yes. Notes would be a very good idea. Yes!
Where's that, Mike Franz?
Oh, good question,
Ethan.
This is the city of Amsterdam. So, why are we starting in Amsterdam? So, hundreds of years ago, Amsterdam decided they wanted to tax people. But they didn't just want to tax any people, they wanted to tax the rich. Now, they were not the first society to do this. They're certainly not the last society to do this. But they decided they want to tax the rich. Now, here's one of the problems with taxing the rich. It's actually not as easy as you might think to figure out who's rich and how much money they have, right? So even today, that's hard. Today, people have all their money in bank accounts, and it's not too hard for the IRS or the tax collectors to find those numbers. And it's still, money's still hidden all the time, right? So people will hide their money in offshore bank accounts so the tax collectors can't see it. They've got all these different techniques. But imagine how hard it is back in the day, right? Where people don't just have bank accounts where you can log on and look at the numbers. Actually, how do you determine who's rich, right? People don't even report how much they earn every year. How do you know who's rich? So the Amsterdam government decided what they would do is they would just tax people on the size of their house. But even that's harder than you think. Because people are going to just let you into their house. You can't just go in and measure the square footage, right? So they said, okay, what do we do? So they decided, all right, well, if a person's house is big, it's probably also going to be wide. So we're just going to go to everybody's front yard and basically measure how wide their house is. Rich people will have wide houses. Poor people will have small and therefore narrow houses. And there's actually probably a lot of truth to this, right? Rich people did probably have wide houses. But here's the problem. Once this law is in effect, people will take this into account when they build their next house. So people started actually building very skinny, tall, and deep houses just so they could pay less on taxes. And this is what most of modern Amsterdam looks like today. You actually have skinny houses as a result of this tax. That is what you call an unintended consequence. The government was making this law just to try to tax the rich people more than the poor people. And after a couple hundred years of this law being in place, you end up with skinny houses. All right, let's go look at another unintended consequence. Jelly beans for pee-pee. So, what are you talking about? I'll tell you. So there's an economist, I think his name is Joshua Gans, and he decided he wanted to incentivize his daughter as a way of potty training her, right? So she's still just kind of learning to go to the bathroom on the toilet. And he decides, I'm an economist. I know about incentives. All I need to do is provide the proper incentive and the potty training will take care of itself. So he says, okay, honey, here's the deal. Every time you go pee-pee on the toilet, you get a jelly bean. She loved jelly beans. And it worked. She started going to the bathroom on the toilet. But what she also figured out was that if she would just go a little tiny bit and then hold it, and then go again a few minutes later, she'd get 2 jelly beans instead of 1. So she learned not just to go to the bathroom or on the toilet, she learned how to control her bladder with amazing control and to pee 8 times instead of once, right? So a few years later, he has a second child, a son, and he says to himself, that whole holding the bladder thing was definitely an unintended consequence, but still it kind of worked. I'm going to do the jelly bean thing with child number 2, and I'm going to step up my game on this one. Now I'm going to also give my daughter a jelly bean every time she helps little brother go pee. Well, what she figures out now is the more that goes in, the more that comes out, and she starts just feeding her little brother water. So he'll have to pee more, so she gets more jelly beans. Unintended consequences, right? So I'm going to give you so many examples, but the next one is a special kind of unintended consequence that we're going to talk a lot about, which is called the Cobra Effect. So the Cobra Effect is a type of unintended consequence. So it's kind of like this. It's like if this, whoa, my gosh, last class, lots of stuff still written.
That was horrifying.
What did that even say? Did it say don't erase this? I hope not. Okay, anyway. Here is the circle of unintended consequences. Here is the Cobra effect. So it is a type of unintended consequence in which, let's say you're trying to accomplish A, you get the exact opposite of A.
Z.
Here's the example that this effect is named after. So hundreds of years ago in a small town in Italy, they had a cobra problem. And I mean, when I say cobra problem, I mean they actually had cobras, like deadly poisonous snakes just slithering around town, right? This is a bad problem.
What city?
I don't remember the name of the city. You can look it up. I've got it written right there probably, but I don't remember the name. But it was a small town you probably never heard of.
Well,
but like a real cobra problem. Like we've got a scooter problem in Austin, some might say. This is a way worse problem, right? And here's the thing about a cobra problem. Is nobody's catching the cobras, man, right? Because you're walking, you're like going through HEB, you know, you're getting your Honey Nut Cheerios and you see a cobra, and the last thing you want to do is hang around and try to fight this thing to the death, right? So people are seeing cobras, freaking out, and running home and hiding under the covers and watching Netflix.
And there's a cobra there.
Right? And there's a cobra, and nobody's caught the cobra. And the cobras are like multiplying and making more cobras. So what do? So the city government gets together and they're like, man, what do? Do we have a cobra catching task force? Well, that's hard because it's pretty hard to find them. Like a lot of times it's just like they're randomly found throughout the city.
Contest.
What if we do this? Yeah, like kind of like a cobra catching contest. How about we just do like a cash for cobras program? We'll incentivize people to catch the cobras. How do we know if they've caught a cobra? Just bring us the dead cobra. Don't keep it alive, just kill it. Whomp it on the head, cut its head, do whatever you want. Bring us a dead cobra and we will pay you money. Now this, again, like many things like this, started working at first. You know, guy goes out, you know, he's walking down the street, sees a cobra, and instead of just continuing on his way, you know, he kind of gets ready to get that thing, right? But then some very enterprising people had a good idea. A way to cheat the system. Breed cobras! Just make more cobras. Do it in a little cage so they can't get out and bite you, and then you whomp them from above and you bring them in. So the city at first is like, man, that guy is really good at catching cobras. You know, it's like, got another 24 cobras today. I'll take my money. I'm rich now, right? Well, eventually, the city catches wind of this. And they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe people are doing this. This is a disaster. We're just going to cancel the whole Cash for Cobras thing, right? Well, now what happens? Now you've got all these cobra farmers with worthless cobras. They don't know what to do with them, so a lot of them just let them go.
Wow.
So when all was said and done,
There were more cobras.
there were more cobras as a result of the anti-cobra program. That is the Cobra effect. When you try to get less cobras, and you end up with more cobras because of what you did to get less. When you try to accomplish A, and you accomplish the exact opposite of A. Let's look at a lot more examples of this. So, every daycare program on earth has struggled with this. We close at 5, pick up your kids at 5, and somebody doesn't get there until 5:17, right? Or 5:33, right? How do we get people to pick their kids up on time? Well, eventually, one of these daycare programs came up with this idea of, we're just going to fine people. If you're late, you pay, and I don't know what the exact amount is, but you pay $20, right? Nobody's going to be late if you have to pay $20, right? Right?
So they pay $20 extra.
Guess what?
An hour.
More people started being late when they started fining people $20. How is this possible? So here's the theory as to what was happening. Is before they started fining you, you were still incentivized to get there on time. Because you knew if you got there late, the teacher's going to give you a dirty look, you kind of feel bad because you made them stay there later, your kid was the last one. That was actually a strong incentive already, but still not strong enough to get everybody out there on time. But when you started charging people $20 when they were late, that actually replaced the old incentive. Now people maybe thought, oh, you know what? I'm already going to be late. I'm already going to eat the $20. I'm just going to run that one extra errand. Or, oh, I'm already going to be late, but shoot, I can afford it. It's worth it to like not leave the line right now, right? And people stopped thinking about it as being like bad for the teacher and just started thinking about it as, it's $20. It's coming out of my pocket. I can take that hit. So this is again the Cobra effect. They made a policy that was going to attempting to get people there on time. And people were less on time after the policy went into effect. There's another one. So, here's what's going on here. This guy's been kidnapped by all these guys. This is a bad scenario. Where is this? Not sure. Some foreign country, right? This happens. There are some places where being kidnapped is really a risk if you travel there. You know, if you go to some of the most dangerous places in the world, people get kidnapped. And pretty much here's what the game is these kidnappers want to ransom him off, right? They don't like want this dude. They want money from like this dude's family or his country, right? So here's the question. We want this guy back. Like, let's say this guy's from the United States. We want him back. So, should we pay for him? No. Should we buy him back? Well, Here's the logic. I mean, if we want him back, we could give money and have him back tomorrow, right? We could probably have him back by the end of the day if we give him $1 million or whatever they're asking for, right? But would this encourage more people to be kidnapped? Because if so, that's a Cobra Effect. We want to save people from kidnapping. We pay off the kidnappers. If that causes more people to be kidnapped, that's a Cobra Effect. And the United States, does anybody know what the U.S.'s policy is on this? They don't negotiate. They do negotiate, but they don't pay. The United States will not pay money to get a kidnapping victim back. Other countries do. So France actually will negotiate and pay to get their people back. And from what we can tell, per capita, more French people may get kidnapped than U.S. citizens. And I had a French roommate for a few years who worked for this oil company, and he would travel all over Africa. Like he did like something in Africa, and he was the only guy for this oil company that did that one thing. And he would talk about this. He'd say, look, like one, I'm clearly like a Westerner, but two, like if people find out I'm French, I'm even more at risk. Right, so he'd always kind of try to keep his nationality secret, and his dad was from Morocco, so he tried to play like he was Moroccan and stuff like that. But he would always try to keep secret that he was French, specifically because he felt like he was more at risk of being kidnapped. Yeah.
So the U.S. used to not have that policy of not negotiating, right?
Well, like they used to pay?
Yeah, did they?
I don't know. If they did, it hasn't been for a very long time. Now the U.S. will negotiate, right? They'll try to talk, and they'll try to maybe throw a bone or two. I don't really even know what bones they can throw.
They trade prisoners.
Trade prisoners, they'll do stuff like that, right? So now that's often going to happen more with foreign country. Like let's say somebody gets arrested in North Korea, we've got somebody from them, things like that will happen and they'll trade. But they will not just give money to these guys. They might shoot these guys. They might try to negotiate in other ways. They're probably going to put a really good talker on the phone to talk to these guys. Now, another thing that happens too is this guy's family might raise the money for him. That is technically illegal in the U.S., but that's actually kind of what happens a lot of the time. Is the U.S. doesn't usually prosecute, and I actually think they almost never prosecute families for raising the money and getting this guy out of jail.
Special forces breaking and fleeing.
That happens too. Then sometimes special forces go in and get them. But let's look at another example. Football helmets. So, football, go back a few decades, and they didn't use football helmets. You guys have all probably seen those pictures of the guy with the leather helmet, which is really like a hat, and his nose is kind of pointing that way, and he kind of looks mean and crazy because he's just been hit in the face for his whole football career, right? So football used to be kind of a pretty brutal game because your head and your face were getting hit all the time. So what do? Well, they introduced this big old crazy helmet. It's got a face mask. It's got all this padding. The idea was it would make the game safer. And you know what? It did. For a while. The game was way safer. Guys weren't breaking their noses when you had the face mask. Not nearly as much. Guys weren't losing teeth like they used to. But yeah, give it a few decades, and guys start learning to use the helmet as a weapon, not just as a defensive thing, right? And now you have way higher speeds at impact than you did 40, 50 years ago. And the football helmet is now probably the most dangerous thing on the football field. Now we're in this kind of era of concussion awareness, and we all know that concussions are probably a lot worse than we used to think they were, and that people are getting concussions in football a lot more than we used to think they were, and the concussions are largely because of the helmet. So if you compare football, modern day football, to a sport like rugby, right? Rugby today probably looks a lot like what football used to look like before the helmet. Well, what do the injuries look like? Well, in rugby, you do end up with more broken noses. You do end up with more lost teeth. You end up with a heck of a lot more cauliflower ears, if you even know what that is. And you end up probably with a lot more
Being
blood.
locked gets you a lot of cauliflower dudes because you just bite up on them.
Yeah, and that's a little bit of a rugby specific thing maybe too. But rugby is more rough in some ways. But in football, you end up with more head injuries, more spine injuries, and more deaths. Right? And it's largely because of the football helmet.
And also,
The football helmet was invented to make the game more safe, and it probably made it a lot more dangerous. That's the Cobra Effect.